G'day mate, 40 here. Just reading a long article in the New Yorker, profile of JD Vance by Benjamin Wallace Wells, and it's quite fair. And almost everything that this guy writes is thoughtful and balanced. JD Vance is a convert to Roman Catholicism. And there's something about converts you should know. As I am a convert, I was raised Seventh-day Adventist, converted to Orthodox Judaism, but converts tend to be high in neuroticism. They tend to dwell on negative feelings. And you also see that in J.D. Vance's visceral resentment against elites. And there's one telling anecdote in the story. In 2016, J.D. Vance showed up to a donor party. He'd published the book, to much acclaim, Hillbilly Elegy, and this is a donor party for the Democrats, and the New Yorker editor, David Remnick, didn't recognize J.D. Vance and said, look, you weren't invited to this party, you need to leave. And J.D. Vance just turned around and left. Remnick didn't realize who he was. But those kind of slights are things that people remember. Another good observation in the article is that J.D. Vance is much better in structured settings. So there's video of an awkward encounter between himself and a donut store clerk. And it went viral because it just looked so awkward. J.D. Vance tells her that he's running for vice president, and the woman says, okay, what kind of donut do you want? But in structured settings, he's excellent, right? He takes direction much better than Trump does, much better than Kamala does, much better than Tim Walz does. He's more capable of learning and taking direction than any of the other three candidates. He was absolutely superb in his vice presidential debate. So he can prepare, take direction, listen to good advice, separate the good advice from the mediocre and the bad advice. And he has had an impressive life. After high school, he enlisted in the U.S. Marines, went over and served in Iraq. Not in a gun-toting capacity, but he was there where people were getting blown up and killed. Then he graduated from Ohio State and Yale University Law School, where he was very much in the middle of things socially. Went into venture capital, became a best-selling author, regular on TV. And there are a couple of traits that make this type of success much more accessible and easy. And that's when you have a humility, meaning you live in reality, right? That's all that humility means. People like to dress up all sorts of fancy meanings to the word humble. It just means that you live in reality. You understand that you have strengths and weaknesses, that everyone around you has strengths and weaknesses, that there are going to be some situations that play to your benefit. There'll be some situations where you'll be called to lead, other situations where you need to follow. And when you are appropriate, meaning living in reality, you're much less likely to get humiliated. So J.D. Vance lives in reality, and he is simultaneously confident of his abilities to learn. And so, unlike the highly insecure Kamala Harris, right, he recognizes that he has strengths and weaknesses, he has things he needs to learn, and he's doing an excellent job at winnowing out all the advice he receives to embrace the good advice and reject the bad advice. And when you have a realistic appraisal of yourself and the world around you and an appropriate level of confidence in your abilities, it's so much easier to separate the good advice from the bad. You become so much more likable. We all have areas of life where we can feel confident in our abilities, and we all have areas in our life where we struggle. Vance over Trump as a presidential candidate. Yes, I agree. Why? Because JD Vance shows that he will listen to criticism, he'll listen to direction, he'll listen to other people's opinions and guidance, and he's able to accept the good advice. Right? Donald Trump is also able to do that, but not nearly as dramatically. JD Vance can transform himself. Donald Trump is 78. He's much more set in his ways. And unlike Kamala Harris, JD Vance isn't fatally insecure. JD Vance knows that he didn't get to where he is by virtue of affirmative action, by playing the diversity, equity, inclusion racket, by playing to the prejudices of rich donors. Right? Kamala is great at raising money. Right? She's great at telling rich people what they want to hear. But there's no there. Right? Any Trump voter can tell you why they're supporting Donald Trump. They can tell you what Trump stands for. But even Democratic professionals can't tell you what Kamala Harris stands for. She hasn't run a campaign where she stands for anything but quote-unquote reproductive freedom, meaning the freedom for women to kill their babies through abortion. Sex and abortion are the only topics on which Kamala Harris comes alive. Otherwise, she seems like a robot. One way that JD Vance rose in the race to become vice president is that he did a lot of adversarial TV. He is really good at tackling adversarial mainstream media. And he learns from his interactions. He gets better. He's able to recognize when he didn't turn in a great performance. And that rocketed JD Vance up Donald Trump's list. And Donald Trump Jr. is becoming a significant power player. So Jason Zengeli, New York Times reporter who is working on a book on Tucker Carlson, came out with a long profile on Donald Trump Jr. and how he's become a significant Republican power player. And he was very much in JD Vance's corner. Don Trump Jr. had read Hillbilly Elegy and when it came out in 2016, I mean, you thought, hey, how is this guy not in our corner? Because while JD Vance has changed on Donald Trump, he was always supportive of Donald Trump's policies. He just didn't think that Donald Trump was doing an effective job of turning these policies into legislation. He didn't think that Donald Trump was serious about his political priorities. So, the most substantial connection between Trump and JD Vance has always been there. They've always supported the same America First policies. It's just that JD Vance thought that Donald Trump, the person, was not the vessel, was not the guy who was going to get these things done. And he changed his mind on the personality of Donald Trump. A political operative tells the New Yorker that Trump saw that the most important states to win this election were in the Rust Belt: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, as opposed to the Sun Belt, where Donald Trump felt more confident. And so if Trump had seen that he was most vulnerable in the Sun Belt states, such as Arizona, then he would have likely chosen Marco Rubio if he needed Marco Rubio. So even though JD Vance has a superior intellect to Marco Rubio, is much more aligned to Donald Trump's policies, if the political situation had required it, Trump would have likely chosen Marco Rubio. So, I mean, I find this is true in a lot of life. You can be much more aligned with an employer or with a group, but if the situation makes you a bad fit, then it doesn't work out. right? The man has to meet the moment. And if you're too early or too late, you're not going to meet the moment. Chris Christie had his opportunity in 2012 to run for the Republican nomination. He likely would have won. But by 2016 and 2020, it was too late. 2012 was the opportunity for Chris Christie, the man, to meet his moment, and he failed. He didn't meet his moment, and so he's never going to be president. So I really like the Democratic consultant on Mark Halperin's morning show, Dan Turrentine. He just seems so honest and fair, which is not exactly what you expect. So I really like Dan Turrentine, the Democratic political consultant on Mark Halperin's show. Yeah, JD Vance is in the prime of his life. He's not an egomaniac. I am from Australia. And I've been watching a lot of videos on cultural differences between Australia and America. And we don't realize how much of our thinking and our habits and our ways of experiencing life are shaped by our early years. So even my, by American standards, lazy approach to dating is very much in line with the low-key Australian attitude. So we are profoundly shaped by our genes, and we're profoundly shaped by our early years. So Dan Turrentine, great, incredibly honest and open Democratic political operative who appears on Mark Halperin's morning show along with Sean Spicer. And Sean is a highly partisan Republican. I was not a fan of Sean Spicer when he was Donald Trump's press secretary. A lot of people hated Sean Spicer as Trump's press secretary and are now going to love him on Mark Halperin's show. Right? Why? This is still the same Sean Spicer, but Sean Spicer is now appearing in a different situation, and so he receives the benefit of Mark Halperin's open approach of promoting peace, love, and understanding rather than partisan rancor. So a more attractive side of Sean Spicer shows up, though it's still highly partisan compared to Dan. And Dan made a profound point on this morning's show. He said Donald Trump is winning 100% on substance. And that was in reaction to Jonathan Alter, longtime Newsweek correspondent who's coming out with a new book, who appeared on Mark Halperin's show last Friday. And Mark asked him, how do you understand Donald Trump's appeal if Donald Trump wins this election? To what do you attribute that? Why do people, so many of your fellow Americans, support Donald Trump? And Jonathan Alter's response was, because demagoguery works. It was such lazy thinking, right? And Dan pointed out Donald Trump's appeal is 100% on substance. He is for protecting our border, reducing immigration, reducing refugee intake, pursuing fairer trade policies, and staying out of forever wars. And that's his appeal. It's on substance. The rhetorical flourishes and the advertising that promote that substance, right, that can vary in quality. And so Politico called JD Vance's primary win, Republican primary win in Ohio for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate, called it the dumbest political primary. But the average IQ of an American is about 97. Right? If you run an effective campaign communicating with 97 IQ Americans, meaning you're also sending out messages that appeal to 85 IQ Americans, it's not going to be terribly sophisticated. It's going to come across as dumb. Right? Sports has a visceral appeal to people with an 80 IQ, with a 70 IQ. Now, there's plenty in sports to also grab the attention of people with a 145 IQ. But whether it's public health messaging or political messaging, you want to send out narratives that can appeal to people all over the IQ spectrum. You'll see this a lot with cartoons. I rarely watch cartoons, but occasionally something will cross my path, and on the surface it is completely understandable to someone with a 50 IQ, or with a 90 IQ. At the same time, there is a more profound message for people to chew on with a 130 IQ and above. So the greatest TV writing and greatest movie scripts have messages that are appealing to people all over the IQ spectrum. And an effective political campaign has to appeal to people all over the political spectrum. But Dan Turrentine, the Democratic consultant, made this point. Every Trump supporter can state what Trump is for. But not even Democratic political operatives know what Trump is for. And probably the best predictor of what Kamala Harris supports is to look at her past behavior as vice president. And as the New York Times elaborated in a recent article, what Kamala Harris is most interested in is diversity, equity, inclusion, right? The sort of policies that allowed her to take advantage of a rigged game to her maximum benefit. So she was obsessed with language in intelligence reports that might have been sexist. And so she got the intelligence community to do some deep dive into whether or not it used sexist language. Right? So sexist language, promoting favorable policies and giveaways to black people and brown people and to her voting constituency is what she's primarily about. Steve Saylor had an interesting post overnight. What's Kamala's IQ? So she graduated from a middling college, Howard, and then she got into slightly above average law school, failed the bar on the first try. Now, California's bar test is more challenging than any other state's bar test, right? It's the most difficult in the nation. But you almost never find great attorneys in California who failed the bar on the first time. There are individual exceptions. For example, I think the dean of Stanford's law school, perhaps not the current one, but a recent dean of Stanford's law school failed the bar on a first try. And so, but for all those individual exceptions, overwhelmingly, you find that attorneys who failed the bar on their first try don't go on to great success. And there are lower and higher IQ parts of law. So personal injury law, for example, is very much like a business. You don't need a high IQ to survive in the personal injury game, though of course it helps. Steve Saylor bet that Kamala's IQ was somewhere between 105 and 115. I would say 115 to 120. Right, her tastes in literature are entirely conventional. They're Oprah Club picks. There's nothing that she has said or done that would indicate that she has an IQ above 120. So normally American presidents have IQs in the 120s because it's hard to communicate with people who are more than 30 IQ points different from you. So geniuses find it challenging to communicate with average people. Right? A genius has a technical definition in IQ literature. It means someone with an IQ of 145 or above. So a genius with a 150 IQ, right, he's going to have a hard time effectively communicating with people with a 120 and below IQ, which would be more than 90% of Americans. So Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, probably two recent American presidents who came closest to the genius level. I wouldn't be shocked if either one of them had an IQ that was near 140. Jonathan is invented. It's such a lazy way out, right, to just say, oh, Trump's appeal is on the basis of demagoguery. It's common as people age to get increasingly lazy in their thinking. I think a younger Jonathan Alter would have probably been more curious, because when you use the explanation, oh, Trump's appeal is entirely due to demagoguery, right, then you don't have to work anymore at understanding. You can just dismiss a phenomenon that you don't like and say it's crazy and irrational. But we would not be alive as a species if Donald Trump's appeal was overwhelmingly demagogic, meaning that Donald Trump was able to manipulate people into voting against their self-interest. If people were manipulated, right, if people were that credulous, if people were that gullible, right, the human species would not have survived until now. We are the product of survivors. We did not evolve for happiness, but we evolved for survival. And we did not evolve to be gullible. We are the products of millions and millions of years of evolution, and evolution does not promote gullibility, because gullibility does not promote survival. Even mentally ill and people with 70 level IQs are pretty good at assessing what's in their own interest and what's not in their own interest. It's really hard to fool people against their interest. And so Alter has just given up on understanding half the country. And I noticed this with some older Jewish literary critics. So blokes who are in their 70s, they'd say, oh, American Jewish literature is dead. And I'd read their analysis and I'd see they'd made some elementary mistakes, and when I'd bring it up, they'd say, "Oh, I might have missed that." So, people tend to personalize things, and when they're in their final days, and they've devoted their life to American literature or to political journalism, it's very easy for them to say, all good things are dying with me, all good things are ending with me. Now the narrative is over because my narrative is over. And this is obviously a fraudulent, self-indulgent claim, but it's particularly attractive to many older people, because once a lot of people get into their 50s and older, they start living much more in the past than in the future. Right? The normal human tendency is to live in the future, not the present, not the past. But you're making plans, you're thinking about how good it will be when you get to university, how good it will be when you get that raise, how good it will be when you retire, how good it will be when you get married. So we live in the future, but we understand things by looking backwards into the past. And as long as leading democratic intellectuals just dismiss Trump's support as the product of demagoguery, they're never going to learn. So if Kamala Harris loses, there should be a deep examination on the part of Democrats, like, why did they lose this election against someone who's highly unpopular? That's the other surprising thing about the past 3 months, is that Trump's favorability ratings have kept increasing, now often into the mid-40s, the 50s, the low 50s, while Kamala Harris's approval ratings have steadied and started dropping over the past month as Americans get to know her more. False. Humans are obviously very gullible. Then explain to me how we're alive, how we're here on the planet, how we dominate the planet. If we're so gullible, how do we stand astride the planet? Gullibility is obviously very bad for survival. So how are human beings still alive, still surviving? How are there 8 billion of us while 99.9% of species go extinct? Like, it's rare to survive as a species generation after generation. And you can have such profound change within a short number of generations, right? You can take wolves and breed them into friendly dogs within 3, 4, 5 generations. And Ashkenazi Jews, for example, develop their extraordinary levels of intelligence within about 8 generations. So sometime between the year 900 and 1200, you had this emergence of a cognitive elite where the men overwhelmingly made their living from white-collar professions and were just so much smarter on average than the people around them. Right? You had the explosion of Ashkenazi high cognitive ability in just 8 generations, approximately 1,000 years ago. So if we ever developed a high propensity to gullibility, we wouldn't be here, because most species go extinct. They don't last. Survival is challenging. So as long as Democrats are in the mindset that Trump's appeal is demagoguery, they're never going to learn. So the Democrats learned after they lost 3 straight elections in 1980, 88, and 92. In 80, 84, and 88, they learned and they shifted towards the center with Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton would talk about how the era of big government is over. Bill Clinton was an extraordinary politician, and he brought the Democratic Party back from the dead, even with all his peccadillos and weaknesses. It's interesting that various Democratic groups are coming out and saying that this rhetoric used by the Kamala Harris campaign, that Donald Trump is a fascist, is a losing message. So this isn't coming from Republicans. This isn't coming from the news media, right? You have highly financed, influential Democratic groups who are coming out and saying this is a losing message, right? Every minute that you spend talking about how Donald Trump is a fascist is a minute that you're not talking about how you can improve the lives of working and middle-class Americans. So I thought it was a bizarre turn that the Democrats talked about a week ago, essentially coordinating with the Atlantic magazine and the major media to denounce Donald Trump for being a fascist, when it's such a tired argument that the left has been using for many decades, right? I read on my show from 1971 New York Times column decrying the widespread argument among the leading intellectuals of the day that America was a fascist country, was on the way to becoming a fascist country. Right, the 7 big lies that dominate media discourse was the topic of the column, and almost all the lies apply equally to today. That the American worker is a hunky, is racist, is ignoble, is disgusting. Right? That was a main talking point back in 1971. One thing that's caught my attention on the Mark Halperin show is how many people who were Bernie supporters are now Trump supporters. So what the heck? What could possibly unite a Bernie supporter and a Donald Trump supporter? And it is opposition to the status quo. People feel that the game of life is rigged against them. And so they're looking for someone to blow up the system, to take on the system on their behalf. And so if the Democratic Party believed in democracy as much as the public pronouncements suggest, then Bernie Sanders would likely have won in 2016 and in 2020, right? He would have been their candidate. Bernie Sanders appeals to the same sort of anti-establishment sentiments that are wildly popular all around the first world, right? The governing party in Japan just lost a major election, which almost never happens for this party. It's almost always in power. Just lost election. Incumbents are losing power in elections all over the world. There's an anti-establishment wave sweeping through first world politics all over the world. Why would America be an exception to this wave? Kamala Harris embodies the status quo. She says she wouldn't change any Joe Biden policies. So people who are opposed to the status quo, people who want to shake things up, people who feel like the game of life is rigged against them, people with some anti-establishment tendencies are going to vote against the party that is in power. And when Joe Biden took over, right, the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And when that's pointed out to Kamala Harris, she says, well, Donald Trump has been running for office for 9 years, but running for office doesn't give you power. Right, Kamala is the personality that embodies the status quo for many people. And she is running as someone who's anti-status quo, but it doesn't land, right? It's not authentic. When you say things, people don't just listen to the words, right? They primarily listen for what's unsaid. They sense your level of conviction. They get a feel for your body language, and they place it all within the context of a wider narrative. And you can't run from the incumbent position and claim to be anti-status quo and to say that you wouldn't change any of Joe Biden's major policies. So this is a powerful force working in Donald Trump's favor and the Republicans' favor. That in England, you had the Tories thrown out of power. In France, you had massively chaotic elections that saw Emmanuel Macron's party almost disappear. And whether people are rebelling from the left or the right, often that rebellion, that anti-establishment attitude, right, that visceral experience of life that the game is rigged against them, is driving people to vote out the incumbent party. And this is a powerful force on Donald Trump's side. So still not seeing any reason to believe that Donald Trump is not going to win this election. And when you look at his body language and the things he says, you look at Kamala Harris's body language and the things that she says, it's clear that Donald Trump feels happy and the Democrats feel unhappy. And there was a Republican political consultant on Mark Halperin's show, Alex, who made the point that in a losing campaign, you start throwing anything against the wall to see if it sticks. You try to ride the news cycle. You try to grab at things that are in the news to grab for relevancy. You try to find a message that might have traction. And the Bob Dole campaign in 1996 was doing this. It was all over the place. And you see this with Kamala Harris, trying to ride the news cycle, desperately trying to find some kind of message that has traction. And in all the flailing about and in the inability to find a message that has traction, people then often settle on what appeals to the base. And the message that Donald Trump is Hitler, Donald Trump is a fascist, that appeals to the base. And it gins up the enthusiasm level of rabid partisans, but it doesn't speak to people who are undecided. I remember there was a pivotal election in Australia in 1975 where it was the Labour Party under Gough Whitlam, the party of the left, running against Malcolm Fraser and the Conservative coalition. And there was tremendously large crowds showing up for Gough Whitlam. There was just rabid enthusiasm on the part of his base. But his side lost the election overwhelmingly. So there's no correlation between the size of the turnout to your rallies and votes for your team. We saw this in 2020 where hardly anybody turned out for Joe Biden campaign events, and yet he overwhelmingly won the popular vote. So It's easy to fire up the partisans on your side. It's very hard to make a convincing case for the undecideds. And so the Kamala Harris campaign is doing what's easy, firing up partisans on their side, as opposed to doing what's necessary. It's interesting to me, it's now more than 3 months since Kamala Harris has been the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, and no one's been able to come up with any outstanding accomplishments or anything brilliant or particularly insightful or courageous that Kamala has done. She's really failed to leave much of a mark. What was Richard Nixon's IQ? I would think it's around the 140s. Your idea that gullible equals not survivable is bizarre. Well, it's only bizarre to you. To most everyone else, it makes sense. We did not evolve to be gullible. Not a terribly difficult point to understand. Am I against Donald Trump? No, I'm not. I would support Donald Trump between these two candidates. Right? I think Donald Trump did a good job as president of the United States. And I think he'd be far superior to Kamala Harris. But I'm not primarily here as a partisan or a supporter. I'm just telling you things that I observe. And Donald Trump deserves criticism. It was a bad idea to use that comic. Did you see that comic appearing at the Madison Square Garden rally yesterday for Donald Trump? And he referred to Puerto Rico as an island of trash. Talked about Latinos love to come inside, both in making babies and in illegal immigration into the country. Talked about carving watermelons with a black guy. Says that Jews love paper. I think he meant money. That was probably not a wise decision for a comic. But if Democrats have seized on it. Republicans responded by saying that the campaign does not agree with the comic. But it's hard for me to believe this is going to change many, many minds. So I was looking at the news this morning, and there are all these news stories about how Donald Trump's campaign rally at Madison Square Garden was dominated by racism. And I suspect even the most rabid racism detector could only find probably less than 1% of the rhetoric there even remotely related to race. And there's nothing racist saying Latinos love to come inside, or that Puerto Rico is an island of trash. That's not racist. That's just some dumb joke. But I was seeing all this news coverage about how the Trump rally had a speaker who denigrated Puerto Ricans and Latinos, Jews and blacks. I thought, that doesn't sound right. And then I do a little bit of research and I find the guy is a stand-up comic. All right, he wasn't a speaker at Madison Square Garden for the Trump rally. He was a stand-up comic who does a particular type of insult comedy. And Ronald Reagan used Don Rickles once at an event. Don Rickles does insult comedy. Right? Insult comedy is a particular genre. You don't read an electricity bill and you don't react to an electricity bill the same way you do to a love note. Right? Insult comedy is its own genre. It's different from the genre of political persuasion. Right? He wasn't a speaker. He was a comic doing a riff. And it was ill-advised by the Trump campaign to use him. And I would understand why Democrats would try to use it to rile up the base. But it doesn't seem to be a big issue of great significance that's going to land with a large number of people. If you were reduced to complaining about an insult comic who took up 11 minutes of a 6-hour event at Madison Square Garden, that seems like thin gruel. And again, that's time that you're not using to make the case for why your platform, your campaign, your presidency, your administration will make the lives of regular Americans better. But the news media just seized on the putative racism, right? It's just declared to be a thing, right? It's such an easy thing to say, because you don't have to produce much substance to back it up, right? The idea that 6-hour Trump rally at Madison Square Garden was primarily characterized by racism is absurd, right? That's highly motivated reasoning, and you see it from the news media all the time. Like, someone will have a long body of writings and pronouncements, and they'll seize on those few things that can be dismissed as racist, sexist, heteronormative, Islamophobic, homophobic. All these imaginary sins. And what makes JD Vance so effective is that he excels in the hostile atmosphere of the mainstream media. Right? He excels at tackling these easy put-downs of Republicans and conservatives, usually by denying the premise. I deny the premise that there's any such moral evil as sexism, racism, Islamophobia, homophobia, heteronormativity. Right? To me, these are all imaginary sins. They're just completely made up. There's no background in Western philosophy or in Western religion, in Judaism or in Christianity or in Islam, that there's any such sin as racism or homophobia or sexism. There's no Torah commandment against bigotry or chauvinism or racism. Right? No great rabbi, meaning no great Orthodox rabbi, has ever published a book denouncing racism. Right? From a religious perspective, these aren't sins. These are the modern conceptions of overwhelmingly secular leftist people who are products of the Enlightenment, who believe that people are born basically good, and that through the power of our reason we can decide morality and meaning and purpose and life strategy all on our own, that we're all primarily individuals. But this is the type of thinking that dominates the mainstream media. Also, all the mainstream media fascination with primarily the Washington Post not giving a presidential endorsement, and then secondarily the Los Angeles Times not giving a presidential endorsement, is amazing in that it has no significance to your ordinary person, right? Regular people don't give a damn. Regular Washington Post subscribers and LA Times subscribers don't give a damn about whether or not that publication endorses for president. People don't read the LA Times and the Washington Post for their presidential endorsements. People read it for sports, for news coverage, for feature articles. But you still have front page stories like 3 days later on the great scandal of the Washington Post not offering a presidential endorsement, when Washington Post endorsements and LA Times endorsements have never changed a large number of voters. You are extremely gullible. There's no such thing as sin, you magic-believing freak. There's only sin. There's only violation of a hero system, of which a shorthand is the word sin. So if you believe in the hero system of Judaism or Christianity or Islam, there's the concept of sin. But concept of sin has radically different importance in Christianity compared to every other religion. Right? Sin is a major deal in Christianity, the burden of sin. Christianity is obsessed with sin and the burden of sin, and that creates the foundation for the Christian belief and the great need for a savior. Right? Sin does not have nearly the same importance in Islam or in Judaism. Right? I almost never encounter Jews who feel burdened by their sins or feel burdened by the concept of sin. Right? Jews, by and large, tend to feel pretty good about themselves. I often find very serious Protestants and occasionally Catholics who feel burdened by sin. But this is overwhelmingly a Christian preoccupation, and it only makes sense if you buy into that particular hero system. We all have a hero system. So, Asics, I don't know what your hero system is, but if someone deliberately stepped on your toe, you would react that this is objectively morally wrong, and you would be appalled. So we all act in the world as though there are objective moral precepts, even though what is right and wrong depends upon our own hero system. But we can't help but live so there are objective moral realities. Also, people will have more trust in us. People will be more favorably disposed towards us if we proclaim that we believe in objective moral truths. Right? People who believe in God, people who believe in objective moral standards, people who are religious, certainly in America, tend to be regarded as more trustworthy than those who deny such things. And even if you're not religious and not a believer in God, if you evince belief in objective moral standards, then you're going to be regarded as much more trustworthy. So we're all constantly sending out signals about who we are and what we stand for in pursuit of our own interest, right? Animals and plants send out signals. You have male deer who grow, great big antlers to signal to female deer that they should pay attention to you and they should mate with you. So I'm wearing a yarmulke right now, right? I'm sending out a signal that I got a high level of commitment to my in-group identity as an Orthodox Jew. So to be alive is to signal. And a very common signal to promote a sense that you are trustworthy is to say that you believe in objective morality. Right? People tend not to trust those who do not believe in objective morality. What's with all the hate watchers in the chat? Greetings from Brooklyn. Now, you say morality is subjective, but you can't help but live as though it is objective, right? Think about the last thing you were morally outraged about. Think about when someone ripped you off, stole from you, cheated you, right? You were outraged that they had violated some objective moral norm. Yeah, I don't know any Jews who feel deeply burdened by sin. Kemadov says he knows many. That's just not my life experience. Right, compared to the evangelical Christians that I grew up among, Jews have really high self-esteem. And there's this common saying about Jewish guilt, but I don't see it. Right? I rarely encounter Jews who are obviously laboring under the burden of guilt. Right? Jews tend to be much more emotionally open. They tend to be much more emotionally volatile. They tend to speak in a much blunter way than Protestants. And they're able to do all these things because they're not burdened down by a sense of their sin. Right? Just imagine living life feeling burdened by your sin. Right? That is not a recipe for being open, forthright, volatile, just giving vent to whatever you feel passionately about. Right? Instead, you're going to be much more stilted and contrived and buttoned down. Right? When life is going well for me, I'm more open and happy and outgoing and more ready to engage with strangers and more willing to share. And then when life is going badly for me, when I'm getting humiliated, I retreat. I don't do as many live streams. I'm much more careful about what I say. I'm less likely to share intimate details. I'm less likely to strike up conversations with strangers. So there are effective and less effective personalities. So being more extroverted than introverted is a more socially effective personality. Being more conscientious, socially effective personality. Being more open is a socially effective personality. Being more agreeable than disagreeable is usually a socially effective personality. So Jews, by and large, tend to have more socially effective personalities in that they tend to be more extroverted than introverted, tend to be more agreeable than disagreeable, they tend to be higher in conscientiousness than average, and they tend to be open to new experiences. But if you're consistently feeling burdened by your sin, if you're weighed down by that kind of depression, you're going to be less open, less outgoing, less extroverted. You're going to be higher in neuroticism. You're going to be a less effective personality. Let's go to the chat. Don't be burdened by what has been. Yes, being regarded as trustworthy does not mean that you are more trustworthy, of course. But we all have to send signals because that affects how other people interact with us. Right? Men often make great effort on a first date or a second date as opposed to when they've been married for 10 years. People make great effort in a job interview because they want to signal that they'll be a reliable employee. Being subjectively pissed off, therefore I'm living as if morality is objective. Dude, your arguments are a joke. Okay, well, just spell out for me the components of your hero system. What do you regard as heroic? What do you regard as right and wrong? What do you regard as echoing in eternity? Right? What kind of behavior is worthy of praise? Right? So spell out your hero system, or if you got some favorite philosophers, please share them. So I have lived in Jewish life since 1994. I've been active member of a synagogue since 1994. The majority of my close friends have been Jewish since 1994. I've only been members of Orthodox synagogues since the year 2000. The majority of my close friends have been Orthodox Jews since the year 2000. So that's the basis on which I make my observations. Now, Los Angeles Orthodox Judaism is a different thing compared to Denver Orthodox Judaism or New York Orthodox Judaism. So by and large, religious identity and commitment is considerably on the West Coast compared to the East Coast. The West Coast is much less traditional. School ties, ethnic ties, religious ties, and commitments are much weaker on the West Coast than in the East Coast. So for many Orthodox Jews coming from New York, right, they look at Los Angeles Orthodox Judaism as weak tea, as a joke. The type of behavior that people will participate in and still call themselves as Orthodox Jews, it just wouldn't fly in their New York Orthodox community. So community has a deeper meaning in New York and on the East Coast, right? You're more likely to have people who overwhelmingly live near where they were born, who grow up and their friends were people they've known since childhood, that they'll go to synagogue and pray with several generations of their family, their grandparents, their kids, perhaps even their grandkids, 4 generations, right, all praying together, eating together, right, much more common in East Coast Orthodox Judaism compared to West Coast Orthodox Judaism. So people on the West Coast are less burdened, less restricted, less loyal, less committed to traditional ties, be they religious or ethnic. Right. There's much more freedom on the West Coast, where you went to school, how you religiously or ethnically affiliate. Doesn't matter nearly as much on the West Coast compared to the East Coast. And this comes with advantages and it comes with disadvantages. But undisputably, Orthodox Judaism in New York and in Israel is usually far more rigorous than in Los Angeles. Okay, ASICs, it's curious that you cannot articulate your hero system. You cannot articulate that which is noble and heroic. So I get it, you're enjoying the pose that you're a cynic. And I assume that you're not married, you don't have children, you don't have any deep responsibilities. So you're in a stage of your life where you're playing a game, where you're putting on a pose, and that's titillating for you. And I've done that too. There were several years when I was at university where I'd tell people I was an atheistic communist. Now, I never joined any communist organizations. I never tried to seriously promote communism. It was just a way to try to provoke people to say something that was shocking and naughty. But then people usually grow up out of cynicism. Like, who is a cynic? A cynic is someone who's been deeply hurt, right? What type of men become players? Right? The type of men who become players are those who've been deeply hurt by women when they were nice guys, when they were kind and nurturing, and they received sufficient humiliation from women that they realized they had to change how they operated with women. And so they became more calculating. They became more emotionally restrained. They learned how to play the game. And they got their revenge on women, right, after feeling that they'd often been humiliated by women. They then got their revenge by sleeping promiscuously with a wide variety of women. And a cynic is someone who's usually had some type of faith commitment and been devastated, been hurt, and the only way that he now knows how to interact with the world is through a mask, by putting on a persona, by taking on the pose of the cynic. Right, that which we give energy to, it reveals our priorities. And if you have to give a lot of energy to saying that there's nothing worth fighting for, that there's nothing noble or heroic in life, then obviously your life's not working. It's very hard to be a cynic and have children, to be married, to love other people. But if you don't have friends, close friends, if you don't have close ties to your family, right, if people aren't relying on you, if you aren't deeply enmeshed in the lives of other people, then you've got to find some way to connect. And by going online and showing off your cynical side gets you attention, and more importantly, it enables you to think that you're so much smarter than everyone else. And you can just hold other people in contempt, that your life doesn't work, you don't have friends, you're not close with your family, you don't have a career, you're not building anything, you're not making any discernible progress in your life, but hey, you can go online and pose as a cynic and feel superior. For thousands of years we've been living under the burden of religion, and it has taken away our freedom. So, Sonia, how would you describe your hero system? What would you say is a better way to live? And I absolutely believe that there are some people who become finer, kinder, more free when they leave religion. It's a chat. married with 2 grown kids. Hero system, I have no hero system. Your request is bizarre. You have a hero system, you just don't realize it. We are incapable of living without thinking that something's heroic, because otherwise we'll be crushed by our own insignificance. And A6 makes a good point that he may indeed have a life of considerable responsibility, and blowing off steam in a chat, right, makes sense. It's a functional approach, because you can get in here, you can have a good little argument, you can get your juices flowing, you can challenge other people's thinking, right? Some people love playing video games, other people love playing basketball, right? I enjoy sharing ideas, observations, and I enjoy having them challenged and responding to the challenges, right? So, like A6, we probably have pretty similar personalities. But if you want to know more about hero systems, you might want to check out the work of Ernest Becker. He wrote the great book, The Denial of Death. In essence, our greatest fear is insignificance. And so to achieve significance, we usually take on the hero system of our community in believing that certain identities will echo in eternity. And so for some, it's being a good Orthodox Jew. For others, it's being a Christian. For others, it's being a scientist and the pursuit of truth. For others, it's promoting socialism or Islam. Right? We all need ways of imagining that our life is far more significant than it is, because the harsh nature of reality would otherwise be crushing for most people. So we invent narrative stories and hero systems that we believe give eternal significance to our choices. So Gladiator 2 is coming out. Can't wait. I love Gladiator. And remember, near the beginning of Gladiator, Russell Crowe tells his Roman soldiers, men, the deeds that we're about to commit here will echo in eternity. And it is an essential human need to feel that your words and your deeds and your identity will echo in eternity. And so overwhelmingly we feel the need to belong to something greater than ourselves, that we are part of something eternal. So I was listening to a bunch of YouTube videos on dating in Australia, often compared to America, and reading some online articles about dating in Australia. And what was striking about the articles by women who were most bemoaning the lazy nature of Australian men when it comes to dating is how unintentionally revealing these articles were of the authors, right? Whenever I speak, I'm revealing myself. And these women would complain that with Aussie guys, they'd go to bed with other Aussie guys, and then the bloke would turn over and he'd start texting some other woman. And I can imagine that would be completely deflating. You just had sex with a guy, and he rolls over and he starts texting other girls to line up future assignations. But think about how revelative that is about the low worth of this woman. Right? Think about the low value that she must hold in the dating marketplace, and the low value that she places on her own well-being, that she would go to bed with such scuzzy guys. We overwhelmingly shape how people react to us. And these women bemoaning the bad behavior of Aussie men in dating, much of it was reflective of the particular women, right? Women are at their most attractive, they have the highest value when they're young, often when they're still virgins, right? In their late teens, early 20s, that's the best time to find a man to settle down with for life. And these bitter, angry articles seem to overwhelmingly come from women in their 30s and later. Once women get into their 30s, right, their value in the sexual marketplace is dramatically dropped. You just have to look at the demographics of females who get raped, right? The average age of a female rape victim is about 15 or 16. And once you pass your mid-20s, your odds as a female of getting raped just fall off a cliff. I remember Aish Torah, which is an Orthodox Jewish outreach group, would hold these 20-something meetings for 20-something signals to get together and discuss topics. And then they'd also hold 30-something meetings. And there was such a dramatic difference in the two crowds. At 20-something was still optimistic, eager, fresh, ready to meet someone. And the 30-something crowd was overwhelmingly bitter, angry, tired. So in my experience, dating seems to be one of those things that people tend to get worse at the more they do of it. Right? So many people accumulate these layers of resentment and loathing of the opposite sex, suspicion. They have so many defenses up that it's hard to get to know them. They have so many ready-made excuses for why their love life has not worked out, why their life has not worked out. There's so little spontaneity and hope and joy left. I'm definitely smarter than you. My 24-year real estate career is doing fine. Okay, Asics, excellent. I'm privileged to have you in the chat, and I don't mean that in an insincere fashion. What's your IQ? I'm curious. Can we be heroes just for a system? Leaving an action is heroic doesn't mean you have a heroic system. Dude, you make no sense at all. Well, you can look up hero system, put it in to Google with Ernest Becker, and you can find out his thinking. I find it a useful may not mean anything to you. Sonia says, I am a woman without a country who has fallen in love with the world and all humanity. We are our own God when we believe in ourselves. Yeah, the concept of a hero system has nothing to do with what is objectively heroic. It's all about an individual's belief system of what he thinks is transcendent. This guy asked me about my non-existent hero system. Well, if you study hero system ASICs, you'll recognize that you have one. Right? When you get ripped off, when you get cheated, when you get stolen from, when somebody deliberately stomps all over you, you will react as though these are objective harms, that other people are committing an objective evil against you. So, in the refuge of your own buffered, reflexive, strategic, autonomous rationality, you can hold that all morality is subjective, but nobody can live that way. Right? If you're in a position of great peril, if you're placed in a desperate situation, if those who you loved the most became terribly vulnerable or terribly hurt, all right, you would cry out. You would be looking for comfort. So right now, ASICs, it seems like your need for a comfort system to give you meaning and purpose in life is quite low. But what about when things go wrong? Right, when life turns more difficult? When everything that you thought you could rely on falls apart? When problems crop up that you never expected and that you have no answer for? So from a purely secular perspective, religion is a comfort system. It enables people to feel significant, to feel that they are connected to eternity, that their lives matter, that there is a community that is on their side, that there is God who's on their side, and that things will work out, and that the just will be rewarded and the wicked will be punished. Now, over the past 150 years, people have increasingly found the comfort that they sought from things outside religion. And so we have a significant decline in the power and significance of organized religion today. You react as if it's only a subjective wrong against you. Well, that's what you say, but what people say is not what they actually do. People usually don't mean what they say, and people usually don't say what they mean. Why do I keep using the weird term hero system? I never claimed that morality is objective. I claimed that there's a human desire to believe that morality is objective. So let's continue this discussion on another day. If anyone's interested, look up the term hero system, combine it with Ernest Becker or my name, Luke Ford, and you can find further information on this topic. Talk to you blokes later. Bye-bye.